I stood at the front row of the chapel, holding my breath as they closed the tiny white casket. My daughter Lily was only 3 days old. She never opened her eyes long enough for the world to see them. And the people who should have stood beside me that day? They were too busy lighting birthday candles across town. The Crawfords' in-laws said it was too much sadness for Jamie's celebration. My husband's brother, their golden boy. So they skipped her funeral. No apology, no shame. Just cake, balloons, and a jazz band echoing through a banquet hall while I buried my child alone. That day, something broke in me. Not from grief had already hollowed me out, but from clarity. One day, I'd make them remember what they chose to ignore. And when that day came, it wouldn't be with screaming. It would be with silence so loud, they'd never forget it. The event coordinator gave me a brief nod as I stepped into the grand ballroom. He didn't ask why I wore black. He didn't question the dark circles under my eyes or the stiffness in my posture. Just a practiced smile and a gesture toward the main room where music swelled and clinking glasses echoed like applause for a life I no longer recognized. Inside, the Crawfords were celebrating Jamie's 30th birthday like nothing had happened. Mr. and Mrs. Crawford sat at the center table, radiant under crystal chandeliers. She wore pearls that matched the frosting on the cake. He raised his glass with a kind of pride that used to impress me. Not anymore. Laughter rolled through the air like fog. Waiters carried trays of champagne. A jazz trio played something cheerful, a sharp contrast to the silence still ringing in my ears from the chapel just days ago. My daughter Lily was gone. 3 pounds, 6 ounces, 47 hours. That's all we got. A heartbeat, a name, and then nothing. When we called the Crawfords to tell them, Mrs. Crawford had paused only a second before saying, "Oh, well, Jamie's party is already arranged. We'll send flowers." They didn't come to the funeral, didn't call, didn't ask if we needed anything. Ben tried to explain. "They grieve differently," he had said. But I didn't see grief in this room. I saw joy, candles, toasts, speeches about how family always shows up. I stood at the back of the room, out of sight, but not out of pain. Jamie was surrounded by friends, mid-toast when I arrived. I watched as he raised his glass and smiled. I just want to say this family always has my back, always shows up when it counts. I felt something snap in my chest. I wasn't sure if it was anger or the last thread of whatever had once tied me to them. I had shown up. I was there when Lily took her last breath. I held her, swaddled in silence, as the machines went still. I planned her burial. I picked out the flowers. I stood alone at her graveside, clutching the little white casket while the wind nearly knocked me over. No one from this room was there. And now, here they were, celebrating as if nothing had happened, as if Lily had never existed. I didn't cry. Not then. I just turned and walked out, past the waiters, past the music, past the smiling event coordinator who offered a polite, "Good night, ma'am," like I'd just left a movie early. No one followed. No one noticed. And that was the moment I knew. Someday, they would. Not because I'd raise my voice, but because I'd make silence louder than any speech they'd ever hear. The front door creaked when I opened it, though I'd oiled the hinges just last week. Funny how even small things forget to behave when silence becomes your only company. Ben wasn't home. His car wasn't in the driveway, maybe still at the Crawfords, maybe avoiding the gravity of a house that felt more like a mausoleum. I slipped off my shoes and stood in the foyer, staring into the dim living room. The baby swing was still there, Lily's blanket folded neatly beside it, untouched since the morning we rushed to the NICU. I didn't have the heart to move anything. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I walked to her nursery, every step echoing like a memory. The door was ajar. I hadn't opened it since the funeral. The soft pink walls, the mobile hanging above the crib, the stack of diapers we'd bought in nervous excitement When the doctor said she might come home early. All of it waited for her. And all of it waited for me to let go. I sat on the floor and pulled the blanket into my lap. It still smelled faintly of lavender and the sterile NICU air. I pressed it to my face and breathed deep, not because it brought comfort, but because it was all I had left. That's where Ben found me. I didn't hear him come in, just felt the shift in air and the weight of his footsteps behind me. "Naomi," he said softly. I didn't look up. "You stayed late." "They asked me to," he replied. "Jamie wanted pictures with everyone." "Of course he did. And you didn't think maybe I needed you here?" There was a pause, long enough to be an answer. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know you'd go." I looked up at him then. He still wore the same navy blazer from the party, champagne stain near the cuff. "You didn't know?" My voice was low, cold. "Ben, our daughter is dead. And your family is out there drinking and dancing like she never existed. And you stayed." His eyes fell to the floor. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to make it worse. "You didn't want to make it worse for them?" Silence. It wasn't anger that flooded me. It was emptiness. Like there was no more room inside me for fury, just the knowledge that I was utterly, completely alone in this grief. I stood and walked past him. "You don't have to explain," I whispered, because tonight I saw everything I needed to. He reached out, but I stepped back. "You chose them," I said. "And I buried our daughter alone." He didn't follow me this time either. And for the second time that night, I left a room before anyone noticed I was gone. They came 3 days later. Not to the funeral, of course not. That had already passed. They came in pearls and polished shoes, with arms full of pastries, and voices full of polite concern, as if this was a brunch visit, as if this wasn't a house where a child had just died. Mrs. Crawford hugged me gently, perfumed and composed. "You look tired, darling, but still so strong." I said nothing. Mr. Crawford handed Ben a bottle of wine. "We thought we'd stop by and check on things. Family's important in times like these." Important? Where were they when I sat alone beside a casket the size of a bread box? When I signed Lily's death certificate by myself because Ben couldn't hold a pen? They took their seats in the living room like guests at a polite dinner party. Jamie even came, still smiling from the afterglow of his grand birthday bash. Not one of them said her name. Not Lily. Not your daughter. Not even the baby. They offered lines like, "It's a tough season for everyone. God has a plan. We may not understand." At least she didn't suffer long. Each phrase felt like a shovel of dirt over what little memory I had left of her. They never said they were sorry. They never said they should have come. And worst of all, they never said she mattered. I sat stiffly on the armrest while Ben poured coffee, trying to play peacekeeper. His hand trembled slightly as he handed me a cup, but I didn't take it. Mrs. Crawford leaned in with a smile that almost seemed rehearsed. "You know, maybe it's a sign," she said lightly, "that you're meant for something different. A new start. Jamie's fiancé just signed them up for a couple's retreat in Tahoe. You two should join." I blinked. Ben said nothing. No one noticed the way my jaw locked, or the fact that my hands had gone white from clenching the couch cushion. This wasn't grief. It was erasure. They were trying to fold me back into their perfect family picture, minus the smudge of tragedy. Wipe it away. Replace the baby with a weekend trip. Replace the funeral with small talk. After an hour, they left with hugs and promises to check in soon. When the door shut behind them, I stared at Ben. He didn't meet my eyes. "You let them talk like that," I said. "They're trying," he mumbled. "No, Ben. They're pretending. And you let them." I wasn't yelling. I didn't need to. Because every time they chose silence, every time they refused to say her name, they wrote their guilt across the walls of this house. And one day, I would make sure the world read it loud and clear. I didn't plan to write. It started with an old notebook I found buried in the drawer beneath the sink. The one where I used to track baby names, cravings, the list of lullabies I wanted to hum while rocking her to sleep. Lily. I wrote her name first, over and over until the ink bled slightly through the page. Then I started writing to her. Not in the past tense, not like she was gone, but like she was listening. My sweet girl. Today your grandmother brought lemon scones. She didn't say your name. No one did. But I remembered how your fingers curled when I touched you. How warm your chest was against mine. How the nurse whispered, "She knows your voice." I wrote until my wrist ached. No one had given me space to grieve. Everyone wanted to rush forward, to pretend, to erase. But these pages didn't flinch. They didn't look away. Each word was a rebellion, a refusal to let her become a silence I was forced to swallow. Ben knocked gently on the door that night. I didn't answer. He opened it anyway, standing in the hallway with that same tired look he'd worn since the funeral. "What are you doing?" he asked softly. "Remembering," I said. He glanced at the notebook, then at me. "Does it help?" "No," I replied. "But it keeps me from going numb." He sat at the edge of the bed, hands on his knees. "I don't know how to help you," he admitted. I looked at Timmy husband, the father of the child we'd buried, and saw someone so afraid of breaking that he'd chosen to disappear instead. "You don't have to help me," I said. "You just have to stand beside me, not behind them." He nodded, but the silence between us had already grown its own spine. It lived in the house now, in every room, and it was louder than either of us knew how to quiet. The next morning, I folded the letter and placed it in a shoebox at the back of Lily's closet. I wasn't ready to let go, but I needed a place to keep her. Not just her things, but her memory, her voice, her breath. So I wrote another one, and then another. Each day, one letter. Some were only a few sentences, others filled pages. I wrote about how the sunlight hit the nursery wall, how the neighborhood kids rode their bikes past our gate without knowing what had happened inside, how Jamie had posted a photo of his birthday cake with the caption, "Best family in the world." I didn't comment, but I wrote, each word stitching back a piece of myself the Crawfords had tried to strip away with their silence and smiles. And as I wrote, an idea began to form, not fully shaped. Not yet, but it stirred like something waking from deep water. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. Not just for me. For her. For Lily. Because if they wouldn't say her name, then I'd make sure the world did. It began with one envelope. Handwritten. Cream-colored. No return address. I sealed it with a wax stamp I found in a drawer I bought years ago, when I thought I might craft handmade thank you cards for Lily's baby shower. That shower never happened. Instead, I used it now for something else. Ben watched me from the hallway. "What are you doing?" "I'm inviting them," I said without looking up. "To what?" "A memorial." His brows pulled together. They already didn't come to the funeral. "I know," I replied. "This isn't for them. It's for her. And for me." I sent 7 invitations, one to each member of the Crawford family. Jamie, his fiancée, both parents, 2 aunts, 1 cousin. All the people who had time for balloons and jazz but not for a mother's grief. I gave no explanation. Just a date, a time, a location, a small conservatory by the lake, the same one I had once thought we might bring Lily to for her first birthday picnic. I didn't ask Ben to come, but he came anyway. The day arrived with rain in the forecast, but the clouds held back. The air smelled of wet earth and something tender like old grief, trying to bloom into something less cruel. I wore simple black. No makeup. No speech in hand. Ben stood beside me in a grey jacket. He hadn't said much in the days leading up to it, but that morning, He handed me a white rose before we left the house. "Say what you need," he said. We arrived 10 minutes early. By 10 minutes late, only one car had pulled up. It was Jamie. Alone. He looked uncomfortable in his pressed shirt, like he'd dressed more out of guilt than respect. He offered a tight nod and avoided my eyes as he sat 2 rows back from the altar of white lilies and a single framed photo. A photo no one in his family had ever seen. Lily, wrapped in a pink blanket, her tiny mouth barely open, her eyes closed but serene. A moment I had captured just before the machines were unplugged. I lit a candle, and then I spoke. Not to them. To her. "My sweet Lily," I said, voice steady. "You were only here for a moment, but you changed everything. I wanted you to hear music, laughter, soft voices calling your name. Instead, you left in silence. But today, that silence ends." I paused and turned. Jamie was crying. Not loudly, but his hands were clenched. His jaw was tight. The kind of cry a man does when he realizes too late what he missed. And then I felt it. Someone behind me. I turned and saw Mrs. Crawford at the doorway. Not in pearls this time, just a plain blouse. No makeup. Her hands trembled slightly as she stepped inside. Mr. Crawford followed, slower. They didn't speak. They didn't take a seat. They stood at the back, like strangers at a stranger's service. But they came. And that was the beginning. Not of forgiveness, but of consequence. I finished the memorial without looking at them again. When it ended, I didn't wait to speak. I picked up the framed photo and turned to leave. Mrs. Crawford reached out, a hand hovering in the air like she wanted to say something. But I stepped around her. Some things don't deserve words. Some things must be carried. And I would carry Lily's Namino in shame, not in silence, but in the clear and unwavering voice they could no longer ignore. 2 weeks later, I walked through the south courtyard of the Crawford Foundation. Ben's family had their name carved into everything from scholarships to medical wings, but none of it ever touched me. I had married into the legacy but never been invited to shape it. Until now. I stopped in front of a granite bench. It sat beneath a Japanese maple tree that had just begun to turn. On its surface, freshly engraved, were 6 simple words. In memory of Lily Grace Anderson, born, loved, never forgotten. No fanfare, no press release, just permanence. I had used part of my inheritance, what my mother had left me before cancer, took her to fund the installation. I didn't ask the Crawfords. I didn't need permission. The space had been open to small donors for years. They'd never noticed. Until today. I sat on the bench and waited. At noon, the foundation board had its quarterly lunch. Mrs. Crawford always arrived early to be seen. And there she was, navy dress, matching heels, a clipboard clutched to her side like a shield. She slowed when she saw me. Slowed again when she read the stone. For a moment, her lips parted, but she said nothing, just stood there, blinking as if the sun had betrayed her. I looked up at her calmly. "She deserved a name," I said. Her voice, when it came, was smaller than I remembered. "You should have told us." "We did," I replied. "You just didn't listen." She opened her mouth again, then closed it. Her heels clicked against the walkway as she moved on, but slower now, less certain. I stayed there long after she disappeared, tracing the grooves of Lily's name with my fingers. Later that evening, Ben joined me. He hadn't asked questions when I mentioned the bench. He simply showed up, hands in his pockets, eyes on the stone. "It's beautiful," he said. I nodded. She deserved to be part of something lasting. He didn't sit, just stood quietly beside me. "You think they'll try to have it removed?" "Maybe," I said, "but not without a story." That night, I posted a single photo online. The bench, the inscription, and this caption: "When my daughter died, My in-laws chose cake over her casket. They never said her name. So I gave the world a place to remember it. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't need to. Truth moves faster than blame when it's spoken softly and carved in stone. Within hours, the post began to spread. By morning, the photo had crossed state lines. Comments poured in from strangers, mothers, nurses, women who'd lost babies, women who hadn't but suddenly understood what it meant to be erased in grief. I see you. They should be ashamed. This is what silence looks like. News outlets reached out. Bloggers asked for interviews. I declined them all. The post wasn't a press strategy. It was a scream I had whispered into the internet, not expecting it to echo. But echo it did. By noon, Say Her Name Lily was trending. That's when the calls began. Ben's cousin, a friend of the Crawfords, even a board member from the foundation. Some begged for the post to be taken down. Others demanded an explanation. But none of them asked the only question that mattered. Why didn't they come? At 3:12 p.m., Mrs. P. Crawford texted me for the first time since Lily died. A single sentence. Please call me. I didn't reply. Instead, I went for a walk. Past the grocery store where I once imagined buying formula. Past the school I would never walk Lily to. I didn't cry. I had already done that. This wasn't mourning anymore. This was reclamation. That evening, Ben came home with tired eyes and a folded newspaper in his hand. On the front page was the photo of the bench. The caption, Mother speaks truth through stone. Viral memorial sparks national grief conversation. He placed it on the table without a word. Did you know they'd publish it? I asked. No, he said. But I'm not sorry they did. I looked at him. Then, really looked. For months I had grieved in a vacuum. But now, something in Ben's expression cracked not from pressure, but from clarity. They've asked me to make a statement, he added quietly. On behalf of the family, I raised an eyebrow. Which family? He sat beside me. Ours. For the first time in months, I felt something like alignment. Not perfect, not healed, but real. The next day, Ben posted a photo of Lily's footprint, the one the nurse had stamped on a card before we left the hospital. He wrote, My daughter lived for 47 hours. My parents chose to celebrate a birthday instead of mourning her. I stayed silent out of shame. But silence doesn't honor her. Speaking does. Lily Grace mattered. She still does. That was all. But it was enough. The Crawfords didn't respond publicly, but their social media pages were scrubbed within hours. No more birthday photos, no family brunch selfies, and I didn't need an apology. Because the world had already judged what they refused to face. Not through cruelty, through clarity. The story had outgrown them. It now belonged to every mother who ever stood alone at a grave. Every woman who'd been told to be quiet, move on, smile through devastation. Lily's name had become more than a name. It had become a mirror. And in it, the Crawfords could no longer avoid what they'd done. Spring came late that year, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. The Japanese maple above Lily's bench bloomed softly, its red leaves reaching toward the sky like quiet hands. I visited the garden often not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. There was no longer pain in the act, only presence. People came now. Strangers sometimes. Women with children, men with worn eyes. They'd sit quietly for a few minutes, leave flowers, notes, sometimes nothing at all but their breath. The plaque didn't explain anything. It didn't need to. The name said enough. Lily Grace Anderson. Born. Loved. Never forgotten. Ben came more too. Not every day. Not with grand gestures. But one morning he brought a tiny wind chime and hung it from the branch above the bench. It was shaped like a bird. I watched it move in the breeze, the soft sound like laughter heard from another room. He sat next to me that day and said, "I think she would have loved music." I nodded. We didn't need to say her name aloud, but we did now. We said it in stories, in what ifs, in the way we left space for her between us, not a void, but a thread. The Crawfords never spoke to the press, never released a statement. They quietly pulled back from their social world, withdrew from foundation leadership, retreated into silence. But this time, it was theirs to carry, not mine, not Lily's. I began writing again. Not letters this time, but essays. About grief, about womanhood, about what it means to lose something and still insist it matters. One piece went viral, then another. I wasn't trying to build a platform. I was trying to build a bridge for anyone who'd ever been told their pain was inconvenient. Months later, I was invited to speak at a hospital fundraiser for neonatal care. I almost declined. I didn't think I had the strength. But then I remembered Lily's fingers wrapped around mine. How strong they were, even in her smallest hour. So I went. I stood behind a podium under soft lights and read a passage from one of my essays. Then I looked out at the crowd and said, "I don't want you to remember me. I want you to remember her. Not because she lived long, but because she was loved deeply. And love is enough." The room was silent, but not the kind of silence that crushes, the kind that listens, the kind that holds. When it ended, a woman in the audience approached. She looked barely 30. Her eyes were swollen. "I lost mine last year," she whispered. I nodded. "Then you know. We carry them with us. Not in sorrow. In light." That night, I went home and stood in the nursery. It was different now. No longer frozen. No longer sacred in its stillness. Just a room filled with softness and memory. I opened the drawer and took out the first letter I had written. The one where I'd said her name over and over. I didn't cry. I smiled. Because now the world said it too. Not in trending tags or candlelight vigils, but in benches, in books, in the way grief made space for meaning. Lily Grace was gone. But she had never, ever been nothing. She was a daughter, a story, a spark. And I, her mother, was no longer quiet. I was not vengeance. I was not shame. I was not silence. I was light.